There we go. Welcome everybody to Contemporary Issues. We are so pleased today to have Reverend Dr. Thomas Wolfe with us, the Dean of Iliff Seminary, School of Theology, technically.
We have a dean, so I'm the president.
Oh, you're the president. Okay, I'm sorry.
I just didn't want the dean to think that she was displaced.
Yes, I was called to the principal's office once in a while. I don't want to be called to that.
No shame, no shame.
No, sir. Topic of the sermon today, in case anybody didn't hear it or those online, go back. Really another wonderful sermon. And today was on shame. So different perspectives.
Preached by an Iliff graduate.
That's right. Well, before we start our usual announcements, Zoomers, please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen when you're not talking. So keep the background noise down. And we are recording this for future playback. And please be kind to our speaker and each other as usual. So with that, any other announcements? Yeah, we had some church this week, Easter coming up. Want to welcome back my wife. Yeah, she broke her kneecap in a fall on the driveway, but no surgery. So I've been in a brace for 8 weeks.
Oh.
And,
yeah,
learning the meaning of patience.
Yeah, 8 weeks.
Yeah. Right.
You don't need, you know, that's the point.
A lot of patience there. Okay. Any other thoughts or announcements about things going on? A lot of good classes this spring here too. Go online and look at the classes that we have, speakers. But with that, let me go ahead and jump in and I will do a quick introduction, a little bio on Dr. Wolfe. And he is a Syracuse University grad. 23 years at Syracuse, New York, Senior Vice President and Dean of Student Affairs, Dean of Hendricks Chapel, and also the Interdenominational Protestant Chaplain. Before that, he was pastor at Christ United Methodist in Moravia, New York. And before that, at the Forest Home Chapel in United Methodist Church in Ithaca, New York. So those of you that are from New York may connect. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Religion from Lycoming College.
Yeah, it's perfect.
And good. And a Master of Divinity from the Pacific School of Religion and his PhD of Higher Education Administration from Syracuse. And he wore his orange tie today. That's right.
That orange tie is for Gene because Gene has history at working at Syracuse University as
And
well.
I have a degree from Syracuse.
You do?
Yeah.
All right.
Good for you.
We will talk. So I'm glad to wear my orange. No, it's also for you.
That's all right. That's all right. I know Dr. Wolfe's going to talk about some of the challenges and changes that Iliff has faced and wants to answer our questions too. I have a lot of questions for him about what is it like to recruit these days and how many and what kind of students and are they second career students and all those kind of things. So we will get into that. But let me tell you a little about Iliff first, in case he doesn't cover this kind of thing. Iliff has more than 2,100 graduates who work and serve in many denominations and organizations and corporations around the world. Iliff is one of the 13 United Methodist theological schools in the US. And he also was telling me as we started, recognized as one of the most progressive in the country. Also proud of that. For more than 125 years, Iliff's been at the forefront of theological education. It's recognized for its emphasis on peace, justice, and ethics. It offers a diverse community in downtown Denver at its campus. And let me just tell you a little about the types of degrees that are offered. It's a graduate school, so there are masters and doctorates available at Iliff, including Master of Divinity, a 3-year degree, Master of Arts in Pastoral and Spiritual Care, a 2-year professional degree. Master of Arts in Social Justice and Ethics, a 2-year degree. And a Master of Theological Studies, which is designed for folks who want to increase their personal understanding of theological studies. And also a Doctor of Ministry and Prophetic Leadership, for those who want to refine their competencies in the context of culturally diverse congregations. And Doctor of Philosophy, was started in 1981 and helps folks do independent research and teaching in the fields of religious studies. Okay, that's a brief introduction. So please welcome Dr. Wolfe. I will do a share screen here so we can go through.
I brought some slides. Not that they should get in the way of your questions and conversation. So please jump in at any point. I see this as a conversation, but these are just some touch points. The question that Steve asked me was, what are some of the issues confronting theological education today? And since I live in that world, I'm glad to speak to that world. I'll also say I'm completing my 10th year at Iliff and as president, and we'll be retiring in the end of June. We are going to rejoin our family who have, since we left upstate New York, have now all moved to New Jersey. So we bought a house in New Jersey. We'll be now 25 minutes from all of our grandchildren. So, yeah, so the time I'm of the age when I can do this, and we still have our health in Maryland. My wife is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church also, and a licensed clinical social worker, and has been in practice in Denver for the last 9 years. And so we're making that migration into retirement, and we're excited about it. We will miss Iliff. We will just miss it tremendously, but it's also a good thing for us. Thank you for the hospitality of this congregation. As many of you may know, this congregation has been the host of our commencement ceremonies for a long time, except for during COVID when we did them online. But we were back with you again this past spring, and we will have commencement again on June 2nd, and you're all welcome to attend and celebrate with us. But June 2nd at 10 a.m. in your sanctuary. So thank you for your hospitality and helping launch our students into the world.
I want to check and make sure folks in the back can hear. Can you not hear so good? Okay, we'll do it louder.
I will lean in. How about that? Is that better? Okay. I'm gonna actually hold it because then I can sit back and kind of look instead of being locked in. Okay.
Great idea.
So I've been asked to talk about theological education, and we are in theological education is really in a time of radical change because the world is changing around it. And so we are moving into new forms of theological education, new degrees and new communities of learners that we're learning need things that theological schools provide, even if they don't need the degree. So I'll be talking a little bit about how we express the essence of Iliff in new forms as we evolve as well. Steve, if you would just go to the next slide. So these are some, I shared parts of this with the board, the last meeting of our board meeting, the last time we met as a board. But this is an anxious era of time. Excuse me. And it's an anxious world of church, and it's an anxious world of higher education. So we have feet in both places in theological education. So we're managing a lot of everyone's anxiety in terms of the future of the church, which we, it's fun to be in an institute, in a church that is obviously thriving like yours is, but not all of them are thriving in the same way. And so it's wonderful to stand in this space with you right now and have such a wonderful worship experience this morning. but not every place is experiencing this. And also in higher education, there's a lot of issues that are impacting institutions. COVID did not help, but these were things that have been forming for the last couple of decades. And we'll get into that a little bit. But it's time to be clear about knowing the difference between having to change and choosing to evolve. And I think that's a mindset that's just really critically important. And Iliff is in the midst of that mindset. So next one, please. So just a brief summary of some of the challenges. And this is not to be negative. This is just to be real about what we're facing. Years ago, I remember saying to the board, we can, and the faculty and the staff and everybody, we can be grumpy at what the world has provided for us right now, or we can get busy and do something about it. And so we've decided to be busy and doing something about it. But the United Methodist internal conflict is impacting all of us. And there are churches in Texas and in the Carolinas and other places that are in conferences that are just being torn apart for some an impossible decision that are making, whether to go into the Global Methodist Church or stay in the United Methodist Church. For us, certainly we have students that are navigating that decision because they want to be ordained in an annual conference and they don't know if the majority are going to go in a particular direction where they may not want to go. So there's a lot of anxiety in our students too, in terms of those who are seeking ordination in the United Methodist Church. So that's and we have students in 42 different states studying with us. So that's just a reality every day. But with that internal conflict and with the change in the church that's going to reduce our funding that we have always had, years ago, the funding from the United Methodist Church in the form of the Ministerial Education Fund that supported Iliff was 1/3 of its budget.
Wow.
When I came there, it was 14% of its budget. I'm leaving Iliff in the end of June, and the percentage of MEF that we get will probably be only about 8%. So we have had, but you know what? We saw this before it happened. And so we've been working on reframing our whole business operation since about 6 years ago. We said, okay, we can get angry about this. We could, and there's a lot of narrative, you hear people say, well, do they respect our theological schools? No, yes, of course they do. But the reality is that maybe we've had a bit of a learned dependency on some money. So why don't we know how to do this for ourselves and still stay in connection with the church? In other words, the church's connection isn't only about money. It's really about a deeper issue. And we need to live into the deeper, more meaningful issue than just the sustaining parts of the resource. Well, the culture changes in how church and clergy are seen. There's countless studies that talk about how clergy who used to have a high level of acceptance and credibility in communities aren't trusted in the same way in different communities. That's a cultural shift that we've got to account for and figure out. Denominationalism is in decline, not just United Methodism, but denominationalism, how people participate in their own spiritual growth and spirituality. But as a result of that, there's fewer students coming in from the United Methodist Church, the United Church of Christ, the Disciples of Christ, and so forth. Mm-hmm. These are places that just used to have students just pouring in the doors and so forth. And then there's widespread decline in higher education enrollment. In 2016, in 2026, every undergraduate institution is bracing itself for what they call the cliff, because the birth rate is catching up. The decline in the birth rate is catching up. And so we have a lot of institutions that are small liberal, I'm a product of Lycoming College, and they used to have 1,500 students. Their average is about 1,100 now. and other institutions like its size that are struggling and now bracing themselves for a precipitous drop in enrollment. And we're downstream, graduate education is downstream from that enrollment, but it means new business models, it means new staffing patterns, it means new programs, it means all kinds of things as well. So, and then the need to change from the post-World War II operational model. My dad went to seminary on the GI Bill after he finished after he came home from the war. He went to Syracuse University. Took him 7 years because he and my mom wanted to start having a family. My mom had gone to college during the war, so he was off in the war. She was in college, and 4 years later, they were now switching roles. But when he went to apply for seminary, my dad was a pastor. When he went to apply for seminary, seminaries were so full that they said, we'll accept you, but we're already full, so we have to defer you for a year. Oh, I wish for those days. Oh, I wish for those days, but those days are gone. They're long gone. There was a time when no theological school needed to have any kind of enrollment program. They had people that would maintain a relationship with church relatedness. And that was how we found our students, and our faculty could, find them as well. But they just poured in. That doesn't happen anymore. That just is that era is gone. And then post-COVID has created a different set of expectations for the workplace of theological education. And we have gone increasingly online. I can brag about this because Iliff, I didn't have anything to do with it. But in 2008 and 2009, Iliff was having an enrollment issue, and then the market fell apart in 2008. We all know that. And so Iliff decided bravely to go online, and they created the first in the country kind of program called the Journey Program, where our students were allowed to take 2/3 of their degree program online. And the other third, they would come to campus. So they would come for gathering days for a week in the spring, a week in the fall, the fifth week of the winter, and the 5th week of the spring term. And they would get their 2/3 of their time on campus. But it became a model. So when COVID came, we just took all of our residential students and just put them into the model. And our goal was, let's make sure all of our students graduate on time, and let's make sure our community is safe. So we put all of our online students online, and a lot of schools were calling us and saying, how do you do it? How do you do it? It's not a matter of putting students on screen for 8 hours a day. That kills people. We're talking about how you do synchronous and non-synchronous learning in the online environment. And we're really good at that. So those are some of the changes. So the core question is this: how do institutions transition from change is about survival, which is oftentimes when we don't have it the way it used to be, we sort of grieve and we wonder, can we really do this? And then we tend to think about, what are we going to do just to survive? Which means sort of code for how do we restore what it was in the past, versus how do we use our assets to evolve into the next meaningful form? And that's the question we've been working on for several years at Iliff. Next slide, please. So characteristics of a survival mindset, confusion between the form of what we've always done, how we teach our classes, the content of what in our classes, who we teach our classes to, all of that. That's the what versus the essence, which is the who and the why we do things. I love the word essence, and I'll get back to it in a minute. But not seeing the existing assets of the institution, sometimes things are just invisible to us. We don't realize what we really have. And so to be reminded of how we use those assets and see them, not comprehending the larger negative trends. In other words, are we looking at the data? Theological education for generations has been looking at church data, because that's been their community and resource for finding students. But the reality is that theological education is in the larger ecology of higher education. So it's only part of the story when things are changing and enrollment patterns are dropping off. It's really important to understand where you are in the larger ecology of all of higher education. So that's the thing we started 10 years ago when I came. We were going to start measuring against those data points. And so we realized that when law degree enrollment goes down, or MBA degree enrollment goes down, surprise, surprise, the MDiv went down in enrollment. The art degree went down in enrollment. What does that tell us about why people were there? When I was at Syracuse in 2008, I was the new senior vice president, dean of student affairs. And it was my third job while I was there. And I can remember us, our enrollment fell off, our undergraduate enrollment fell off. But what we learned also was that the market stopped hiring. So all these recent graduates who always wanted to get maybe a master's degree thought, okay, I can defer my student loans by going back to school full-time. And I'm going to use this moment. I'm going to get myself a master's degree. And when the market improves, I'm going to be much more marketable to the rehiring process. So we sold a lot of master's degrees that year and not compensated for our budget woes from other ways. So I said boldly to the board when we began to experience another decline in the market a few years ago, recently, let's see what happens. Well, that didn't happen this time because the hiring has never stopped this time. So we've got people who don't need the degree at the same time. So it's a different moment, but we do learn along the way. But looking at the trends and then mind, the survival mindset is really not wanting to change or assuming trends will cycle back to a familiar time. We know that doesn't work. Every day has its moment and then something changes. And reduced spending seen as a solution. That's the dangerous one here. Because you say, well, we'll just reduce spending until things change and it'll come back. It doesn't. It doesn't. And all you do is send the message to the world that you're in the process of closing down. So reducing spending is not the answer, maybe for a year, but that doesn't equate to good stewardship of one's resources. That's a different matter. That's a different matter. So next, please. And then the evolving mindset. It's a commitment to preserving the essence of the institution by changing the forms of practice. I'll come back to that. That's the core. Seeing how existing methods can serve new purposes, studying existing trends as real and with an open mind, asking stakeholders to consider what if scenarios. Always remember that denial can be operating under the surface, and commitment to engaging many voices at all levels of authority and lived experience, both inside and outside the institution, is really critical for that kind of mindset that leads to evolving versus surviving. I grew up, my grandfather was a pastor, my dad was a pastor. It was my mom's father, so it was my grandfather on my mom's side. And so I grew up sitting at the feet of all these clergy folks. And I've also, people hate this about me, but I grew up in a family of storytellers, so I became one, but the thing that I take from my family is, my grandfather tells a story about being a pastor in a church, and he had two leaders in his administrative board that were opposites of each other. They disagreed about everything, but they were the two captains of industry of the day in Elmira, New York, in the southern tier of New York State. They both had big businesses, and the day of the stock market crashed, they had an administrative board meeting that they decided. My grandfather called around and said, with what's going on today, maybe we shouldn't meet. Maybe you should be with your families tonight. And these two captains of industry, who were the major employees for most people in that church. It was a large church in Elmira Heights, New York. And they said, no, even though they disagreed about everything, they said they agreed about this. We need to meet. And that administrative council met that night and until 1 or 2 in the morning. And they re-envisioned the whole ministry of the church because they could see the layoffs that were coming. They could see the needs of the people, and they built new ministries in their minds and then implemented them later. And they did that on a pivot. I grew up with that story. And I'm grateful to have that story because it took my mind out of the moment of how do we hold on to, the changes on our plate, that we have got to be faithful to our mind, our ministry and our purpose for this congregation. So, and then, Iliff's assets that, so shifting it now to just the trends, just some things that I'm glad for you to know about Iliff. We have a great faculty and staff. We have no institutional debt. I didn't come here with finding debt, and we have maintained a debt-free institution. Yeah. And we haven't raised our tuition in 6 years because we found ourselves up high next to a high-priced institution. And we froze our salary, we froze our tuition, and we have maintained enrollment with that tuition. We've improved enrollment with that change.
How many faculty and staff?
We have 49 faculty and staff. We have, and when we're done with the hiring cycle that we're in for faculty right now, we'll have 18 faculty next year. And then the balance of them that make up the 49 would be staff. Administrative and others, yes.
So 18 professors.
18 professors, yes. Which for a school our size is just about the right size. We actually did a study of what's the right size. Because we cover all of our programs as well. But no institutional debt. We used to have $7 million of deferred maintenance. We have brought it down to annual maintenance only. So that's debt. That's the kind of invisible debt that kills you. And so we have improved our facilities and at the same time taken it down to functionally zero. Obviously, you're going to repair things all year long, but that's not, we're not behind in that. That's just as it emerges. The value of and clear title to property and buildings, that's a big issue for a lot of theological schools, but we own the ground underneath us all the way down. And we can talk about why that's also important. Other schools are finding it difficult because they don't own their land and they're being displaced. Endowment growth, we were at about 33 million for a long time. And you can't look at it this week. Don't look at it this week. But before the market turned down, and which means, and we're not overspending our endowment, so it will rebound with the market. We were at about 49 to 50 million. So our endowment has grown. Our annual growth and annual giving has gone from about 750,000 a year to 2.35 million per year. This year is a little off because of the market and people's ability to give appreciated stock, et cetera, you know, that kind of thing. But here again, the support base has grown. We have really put ourselves back in the market of grants. We got our largest grant in history of the school with $1 million grant from the Lilly Foundation for a program. We have an artificial intelligence institute, the only one of its kind in theological education. And we've gotten $450,000 from the Luce Foundation, that they invited us to get another $250,000 grant. And that's just those. There's many other things that we have grants for now. So we've seen growth there. And then new emerging communities of learners and consulting relationships. So watching the clock, I want to leave time for you. And I'm almost done with this, then we'll have wide open. But the interesting thing about the new learners, one Good Friday about 4 years ago, you know, enrollment has declined across all of the 250 theological schools in the country. Iliff was about 3 years behind that curve, and then it happened. Boom! You know, we were up to around 300 students in our heyday. We are now at around 150 to 200 students, and it finally caught up with us too. But we held out a little longer, but we knew it was coming because it's everywhere. But so one Good Friday, just wanting to just have time to think. I went to the basement of our house, the family room, and there was a little niche in there. There's a little room off the room, and with great lights, and I put paper on the walls all around me, and I got out markers of different colors, and this was Good Friday. You can make any symbolism out of that you want. And I began to just think out loud. And began to take my own advice and say, all right, what's going on in higher education? And where does this mean? And I made a presentation to the board of Iliff, and this is not a hero story. This is just thinking it through and just trying to be faithful to the work and just trying to figure out what on earth is going to be new. And we began to rethink theological education. You know, we've always been looking at the larger trends and all of that, but it came to the time when we needed to understand our part in it. So we created a futures process. We hired a consultant. We brought people in to do marketing research, and they did a massive marketing understanding of Iliff. And it confirmed that we've got the right degrees. We still need MDiv. Because we're taking students and moving them into the United Methodist Church and other denominations that require the Master of Divinity degree. We knew that was there. And we also know our commitments to social justice, and they were very intrigued by that. And they took 1,200 people, and in small groups of 3 and 10, depending on the area, and then they designed a complete report back to us. And one of the questions that went into that, we had asked that a couple of years earlier, but it was early on. And what would happen if we brought the theological disciplines into a conversation with heretofore non-traditional partnerships? So here's the story. A board member called our attention to a open forum that was going to take place down in the industrial part of Denver on artificial intelligence. Now, we had people with some artificial intelligence experience on our staff. And so we had some very early interest in it. And so we had these 5 people on this stage talking about different kinds of scaling up and their use of the future of artificial intelligence, et cetera, but no mention of theological education and artificial intelligence. So at the end of the presentation in their panel discussion, they tossed the microphone into the audience, and I asked for it. I stood up in front of about, I think, a couple hundred people, and I said, so I'm the president of a progressive theological school in Denver, because I didn't want the stereotype of something else in everybody's room. They think of theological education in the most conservative, religious, restrictive terms, which is not who we are. So I said, so what would a progressive, saying it the second time, progressive theological school have to offer from your perspective in the field of artificial intelligence? And there was dead silence in the room, but except when I said from a theological school, everybody in the audience went like, what are you doing here? Right? This is a true story. This absolutely happened. And there was a dead silence. And I thought, okay, there's our answer. But I'm standing there and I'm not letting the microphone go yet. Finally, the panelists began to really think about this. And one of them said, we need as many voices in the development of artificial intelligence. And you, who have been teaching what it means to be human for generations, need to be part of that conversation. Yeah. So we created the Artificial Intelligence Institute with that first grant. And now we are doing consulting work. This is part of our marketing strategy. We are now doing consulting work around the ethics that protect the consumers of artificial intelligence.
Good.
And so we can evaluate now this artificial intelligence that will help. So is it traditional for us to do? No. But is it our essence? Back to essence and form. We would never have imagined that even 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But we're taking what we care about as an institution, what we've been teaching about for 130 years. And we're saying, okay, but we can change the form, but is it our essence? Do we have any business being in this? And yes, we do. And so we take our commitment to social justice into a new form with a new community, and they pay us for it. And so it's revenue. And then we realized that attorneys have a requirement for diversity, equity, and inclusion training. This has been in our required curriculum for generations at Iliff. So we are now training teams of people to work with attorneys and whole communities of people who know they need to do this, and they love the fact that there's a lot of mom and pop things popping up there. Everyone's all of a sudden an expert in DEI training, but our credentials are very solid because we've been doing it as a graduate level educating body for generations. So that's a differentiator for us in this new marketplace of DEI training. We have developed an Institute for Religion, Politics, and Culture, and we have if you're a podcast listener, go to Complexified, COMPLEXIFED, Complexified, and log in to our podcast now. And we've got other things that we're doing called all under the Innovation Lab of Iliff. And it's not just this thing over here, because I've been watching other schools who are trying to replace the revenue they're not going to get from enrollment anymore. And they create these little entities over here. What happens is those just become self-consuming, and the money never makes it over to the traditional program. And the other part of this is there is the role of faculty is changing in higher education, and they need new pathways to express their research. And so this is the one thing in the futures process that I personally insisted on, that we not have two lobes called Iliff, but one lobe with different manifestations, so that when the revenue comes in from the new work that we're doing, it will come into the whole thing. And that when we need to drive the new way of creating opportunities for these new learner communities, that it's our faculty research that's driving it. So that our faculty have these new pathways in addition to their classroom experience that they share and in the degree programs that they share, but we're also doing this other thing. So I think that Iliff is on its journey toward this new way of being in the world without compromising for a moment its historic essence of its commitments to church, its commitments to social justice. And we don't have time for this, it's a different project altogether, but I'm glad to send to you the link if you haven't seen the public television special on the Iliff book, which is a book that Iliff took into its collection as a gift 1 year after it was born in 1893. It took into its collection a history of Christianity, published in Europe in 1752, written in Latin, but covered in the skin of a Native American man. And if you haven't heard of it, I send the link to Stephen, so you can hear it. It's a 27-minute. We've asked for public accountability. We have built a permanent relationship with the Lenape elders. It was a Lenape man we know was murdered for the book. And the book was really a trophy because it was about all the things that even the church participated in terms of westward expansion and so forth, which gives us a non-human view of Native Americans. And so part of the issue was that it was held in secret. It was kept on display for 80 years with a card saying this book was covered with the skin of a Native American man killed in hand-to-hand combat by Captain Morgan of West Virginia, Morgantown, West Virginia, Captain Morgan. And but the truth of the matter is also that it was discovered by a group of students in 1974, caught a conscience about it and insisted on something happening differently about it. And so we so it was then dealt with, the cover was repatriated appropriately, but everybody in the room had to sign non-disclosure agreements. So it then became a secret. And it has been just a burden in the life of the institution. It was just time for us to tell the truth about it. And with a world of institutions all having their issues with their histories and slaveholder owners and founders and Confederate things on their campus and Confederate generals' names on their halls, we are demonstrating, little Iliff is demonstrating that it's not about protecting the brand. It's about living into a brand of integrity and doing it publicly. And instead of throwing money at it, which makes everybody go quiet and calm down, we have just chosen to have a relationship with a community of people who have been most harmed by it. So these Lenape elders are coming again in April, and we're meeting again tomorrow morning by Zoom. And all these projects that we have going on in the institution because of due by the recommendations that they presented to us as part of the relationship of how we began a new history with them. And they're wonderful, and we're getting along great, and we're being faithful to their recommendations. So we'll send the link around to you. All right, I'm going to stop talking.
Okay.
I've talked too much. But yes, please.
I'm intrigued by your school and this evolution process. that you've gone through.
Yeah.
And for me, it kind of begs the question, because I'm not familiar with the school. Do you guys have a mission or a vision statement? And if so, what is it and how has it changed?
You're gonna make me do this from memory. It's on our website. I'm sorry, I should be able to repeat it, but it right in the moment. But we do create religious leaders who are and servant leaders and prophets and prophetic leaders. But I'm sorry, I would invite you it's right on the front of our website. Go to iliff.edu. Yeah, we can send that link as well. And there's other things there that you should see as well. We've just finished a new branding and a new, which still captures our essence, but helps us live more fully into the future.
Iliff.edu.
Iliff.edu, yes. Yes.
I find you to be incredibly refreshing, Tom, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
I also am amazed with how much that you keep religion contemporary and are redefining everything that it lives every day. I'm really concerned that you're leaving, okay, so given that, how is your search going, and what kind of criteria you're looking for the next success?
I'm being very good and not participating in any of that. As the outgoing president, you shouldn't do that.
Oh, I get it, okay.
And so I literally, I know where they are in the process. I know they've got their first cut of candidates that they're going to be interviewing by Zoom tomorrow and the next day. That's when I'm here. I don't know who they are. I don't know where they're from, and I shouldn't, and I won't ask. So, but I hear there was a good number of applicants, which pleases me. Because the role of president has fallen precipitously. There was many years you find 15, 20-year presidencies, and now they're down to 5 years, and that's not even counting the 2-year ones that never really fully engaged and they just never developed. So I feel like I've been there a long time. 10 years is a long presidency these days. So, but thank you for your thought and your yeah.
Tom, would you say something about the joint degree programs?
Oh, yeah.
And and have you been able to track where they go for employment? And that also speaks to the issue of the other issue of where graduates from Iowa are finding employment with the shifting universe.
Yes,
You're dealing.
the shifting universe. Yeah. We have a joint doctoral program with the University of Denver. And we have a joint program between the MDiv and the Master of Social Work program. So the social work side is done at the University of Denver, but we are completely a separate institution we were founded under University of Denver. But 5 years after it was founded, that everyone had closed their schools because of the silver crash. And when 5 years later, when we came back into business, the Iliff family wanted them to be completely separate because they were afraid that DU might sell the property to survive. So they made a gift to Iliff or to DU so the Iliff could have a president, not a dean coming in, and we owned our land. So thank you. Thank you, the Iliff family, for your foresight in all of this. Our students are still going into parish work. And a lot of our students are going into chaplaincy work as well. And our students are coming to us with 35% of our students identify in the LGBTQIA community.
What percent?
35%. We're very proud of that. When the 2019 General Conference took place, I went to that committee. I went to St. Louis a day after one of our regular board meetings when the board voted unanimously, publicly, that no matter what the decision was going to be in St. Louis, we were going to be open, affirming, and we would never betray our students. And we would, and then I wrote a statement after the vote and sent it to the community. And when I came home, when I came home from St. Louis, I walked into the foyer of Iliff, and here's this huge rainbow flag hanging in the foyer. Yeah. Yeah. And so, and these are a lot of people, I'm hearing there's this person speaking in the general favorably toward the Global Methodist Church who loves to point at Iliff and say, trashy things that have no context or truth, or take a detail and not provide any context. And it oftentimes targets our LGBTQIA trans community. And these are people who would love to be a part of the church.
Sure.
But have not been given the same opportunity. And so we will always stand on that side of the equation for them, always. And so, but we have, so chaplaincy, not for nonprofit leaders who are going to do community change. We've got a lot of people working in those fields. And we've got people teaching with PhDs all over the place. But one of the things I've been hearing, I have had a practice of introducing, if I don't know the bishop, I find a way to meet the bishop of different areas. And I've had, went through a period of time where people were wondering about it. And when I first got there, so whenever I would be traveling for business with the denomination in different capacities that I've had across beyond Iliff, I would always find the bishop who was staying at the same hotel and invite myself to sit with them at breakfast. And then tell them stories about Iliff. And to undo some of the other assumed things. And back in August in Chicago, I had 3 bishops with me and who I have known very well. And one of them was having breakfast, and I introduced, and I said, "Can I join you for breakfast?" And this was a bishop whose conference is really torn apart by the GMC UMC conversation. And she said to me, "Tom, I've got to tell you," and I've been hearing this from other bishops, "the students that you've sent, that we have ordained, who are serving our churches, are so well equipped to deal with conflict, and they are much more functional in the context of these congregations that are torn apart. You should be very proud of them." I said, I am. And I brought that message home with me, and I shared it with the board, and shared it with our staff, and shared it with our faculty. And so that's part of where we're going.
I want to take a second and invite our Zoomers to ask a question. Please feel free to jump in like you're not intruding at all. Nobody has a question right now? Okay. I could talk to Dr. Wolfe an hour just for myself, but let me ask you two quick questions.
Sure.
What percentage of students are second career students? And also, what does the school do to teach pastors about budgeting and pastors always say that I wish I'd learned more about managing a staff and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's been a part of the transformation of theological education. Every theological school is being asked that question because every congregation is worried about that.
Yeah.
And so we have a series of curriculum of everything from fundraising. I actually get to teach once a year, and I share a thing on fundraising.
Okay.
And it's a big part of my job anyway, so I might as well teach it. From managing budgets and finance, our finance guy, our new chief financial officer, is just this wonderful guy who loves the mission of Iliff. He's Anglican, he's Episcopalian, and he does it for his church, so he does it for us too. And let's see, there was something else. What other
Second career.
Oh, second career. Our average age of student is 40. Most of our people are second career. We've begun to see some people coming out of college, but my favorite story is this. We have this guy who is a member of the Disciples of Christ, and he wanted to go to seminary, and he was an Air Force pilot, and then he was flying for a major cargo carrier. He's a 777 captain. That's a big airplane.
Yeah.
And he was regularly flying all around the world, all week long. He would be in Japan, he'd be someplace else. And when he gets that thing on autopilot, then he starts reading theology.
Wow.
And I'm a pilot for fun, and I have a wooden antique propeller hanging in my office. And he came in to visit me one day. He goes, "You got a propeller in your office?" I said, what does that mean to you?" He goes, "I'm a pilot." And now we're best buddies, but he told me the story, how he just, he spends hours in the air. And he did most of his studying in the left seat of a 777. And we've got doctors, we've got attorneys, we've got a lot of attorneys. And whenever we're introducing ourselves to new students, I always tell this story. I said, look, we're a diverse community of people, but there's one thing we all have in common. And that is that all of us had a different direction in mind for our lives. I soloed when I was 16. I went off to aviation school my freshman year and experienced a distinct call to ministry during a really bad sermon at a Methodist church, and I won't tell where. But despite the bad sermon, I still felt this unmistakable call to ministry. So that interrupted my life. And I say to everybody, you thought you were going to be an attorney, you thought you were going to be a finance person, you thought you were going to be a teacher, you thought you were going to be this, and all of a sudden you're in theological school because this thing inside of you kept speaking to you. And I say, so the one thing we all have in common is that we all have an interruption story. All of us have an interruption story. And then I tell my own interruption story. And I say to them, don't think you're coming to become something else. Come thinking you're going to be the most authentic self that you can ever be. But when you come through the door, bring everything you've ever experienced, because we need you to be educating each other in those storytelling. So if you've been hurt by the church, we need to know. If you have been doing some other kind of work, we need to know. If you have challenged boundaries someplace in your work, we need to know. And so we invite everybody to come in and engage in the teaching experience between classes as well as during classes. So, yeah.
You're an incredible observer. GMC, UMC.
Yeah.
What are you seeing, and what advice, what can you, open-ended question, what are you seeing? What can we learn from you? What can you caution us with? What can you?
I said the split in the church over the same-sex marriage. Yeah.
And it's even deeper theologically than that. it is not my business, nor is it my inclination to stand in judgment of a congregation that feels it needs to leave. I, for a long time, opposed and stood at General Conference as a delegate in Cleveland in 2020 or 2000, and made the saying, my words were this: how dare we talk a split when we haven't even had the conversation? Because a lot of my work has been done with interfaith dialogue. And around people with really deep issues, opposite issues. And I don't think we have ever had the conversation to this day. I know we had a group of people that did it, and they did it faithfully, and I know the people who led it, and I really respect them. But we've really never been willing to have the conversation and tell the truth to each other. Well, what's happened is that erosion has taken place without the conversation, but now I think we're at a place where we've got to just let people go. And so let them go. And we have to be let go. It's a mutual letting go. But here's my concern with the theology of the GMC, and this is where I'll reflect theologically for a moment.
That's the conservative churches that are leaving.
Yes, and there's the word orthodoxy, saying where there's a restoration of orthodoxy, Methodist orthodoxy. I'm the president of the International Association of Methodist Schools, Colleges, and Universities. I have to give that up when I leave Iliff, but we're having our last conference in London in April. And we are writing a document right now about revitalizing for the world Methodist world, not all United Methodist, revitalizing and reclaiming the Wesleyan tradition of of education, which was not orthodox for its day. We have to remember, well, Wesley was a dissenter in his culture. My favorite story is going to having an afternoon of business for Syracuse in London, and I had an afternoon free, so I went down. I hadn't been there in a while, and I went down to Wesley Chapel and jumped the fence because the cemetery was closed. The gate was closed. I jumped in. I wanted to pay homage to Susanna Wesley, and I did. And John is buried behind the chapel, and I thought, I wonder who else is there. And all of these noted writers, John Bunyan, Isaac Watts, the hymn writer. These are all people who were buried outside the walls of London because they were dissenters. They weren't not allowed into consecrated ground cemeteries. This is this is what we stand on. These are the shoulders that we stand on in our tradition. So they disrupted orthodoxy to see the people's experience. And so I'm concerned with the language of orthodoxy in the GMC. And already, and I was in Africa for a moment, and I was talking to one of the African leaders, religious leaders, and I know we're at time. I will finish. And we were there to talk about things. I was in Cote d'Ivoire for IAMSCU, but also as the former president of the University Senate. And they were the African conferences want to build an accountability structure for its institutions. And we weren't there to tell them how to do a university senate, but I was there to present on what the value of a university senate, which is the accrediting body of Methodist institutions in the United States, what it meant to us, and saying, if a culturally appropriate one for Africa would be great, and we would support you in that, but you got to build it. But we're having these deep conversations, and finally I'm at dinner with a very outspoken person about the more conservative movement, and I said, I hear you, I really do, but here's my concern. My concern is, it feels to me like colonialism in religious form. Anyway, the African is, I'm hearing it now. I'm not the only voice, so do not take this as a decision, but that is a suspicion. And the bishops in Africa are believing, or I believe, are going to stay in the United Methodist Church out of that one fear. It's so easy for the religious life to then think it's in its best interest of the people, but still now struggling with where's the control going to be and where's the identity, the culturally appropriate identity. So I am publishing a statement that we'll talk about. We have that Methodism is the most Methodist Wesleyan theology is a gift to higher education because it doesn't require a particular form. There's a spirit about it. There's an essence about it that crosses cultures so that we can embrace the Wesleyan understanding of education without violating a culture to do it, without controlling a culture to do it. This is just a huge thing. So that's my concern. And I'm going to stop. Thank you. Thank you. You have been wonderful. Thank you.
We are out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Wolfe, and thank you to Gene Dawson for inviting him.
Yeah.
And we hope you'll come back again sometime.
Anytime.
Great.
You got 4 minutes.
Yeah. We love having you, and we want to pray for you. Thank you for everything you do, and Lord, please bless Tom and his family in the future. Thanks, everybody, for coming. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye.